Shmiras HaLashon. We are in the first section, the Gate of Discernment, the Shar HaTvuna, and we are in section Yud Beis, or 12, section 12, and we have moved past our discussion of Bitachon now, and we're now discussing the recollection of Miriam when she spoke Lashon Hara herself, and what that lesson teaches us about how to save ourselves from this bitter sin. As he used the word avon hamo, this bitter thing. And there is so we've talked about how bad it can be to say Lashon Hara, and we've talked about the ways in which it detracts from our ability to do good things and interact properly with others. And so now the Chafetz Chaim says there is a lesson to be learned, a general piece of advice through which we can save ourselves from the bitter punishments of this type of Lashon Hara. And we learn this in Parshas Ki Seitzei. So what does it say there? So this is Devarim 24:5. He says, "Be wary of the plague of the tzara'as." Okay, the plague of the skin affliction, sometimes called leprosy. It's not really leprosy; it's like leprosy. Be very careful of it, and do everything I've told you to do, according to how you are taught by the Kohanim. And the next verse says, in verse 9, "Remember what Hashem your God did to Miriam on the way of your exodus from Egypt." So written right next to each other, what does that mean? So in the Sifri, the work of the rabbis of the Mishnah that explains some of the verses in the Torah, it says in the Sifri, recall what was done. Does that mean to recall it in your heart? Asks the author, the Stam author. Okay, he says, and it says, you should be wary of the affliction of tzara'as. Be very careful of it and to do. So it's referring to something you should do in your heart. Why does it mean something you should do in your heart? The Chafetz Chaim explains. Because when it says to guard the affliction itself, it means from the affliction. And what it's intending to teach you is that you should not turn away your thoughts from guarding yourself from the sin that could cause this affliction to occur. Aha. Now, how do I fulfill the command of remembering? Asks the Sifri. So it means that you have to repeat it with your own mouth. So the Torah is telling you that you have to make mention of this terrible punishment that happened to Miriam in your heart and with your mouth. Why? Because that improves our ability to keep this thing constantly on our minds. Furthermore, the Ramban explains the following, that there is a mitzvah here, which is number 7, and he says the following. We are commanded to have to recall this with our mouths and to keep the thought process dear to us. What was done by the Holy One, blessed be He, to Miriam when she spoke about her brother. When she was herself a prophetess, and in order to keep ourselves so far away from Lashon Hara, and that we should not have to us what happened to her, he quotes the verse in Tehillim 50:20. When you speak about your brother, and you speak about your son, and you place all of your nasty thoughts against your own mother, okay, which is the end of that verse, because the truth is that making a mention of this prohibited act and how terrible the punishment can be, a person will be that much more cautious against doing it. The Shmira will increase. And just like we say about anything that keeps you from doing one thing, in order to recall it properly, you have to do something for that. Okay? Because it says you should recall all the mitzvos and do them. And Rashi says over there that that says that you have to recall all of them. Those are the words of the Ramban. The Chafetz Chaim himself continues, one should not be so astounded, because when we see ourselves an experience of something that is told to be a reminder, and even in the moment when you say that reminder, you're also going to say something bad. So what kind of lesson are we learning from this, from the Torah? Okay, so the Torah itself, it says, and he's quoting Devarim over here, 32:47. Page 176 of the Archel Siddur has the 6 remembrances to read every morning. And remember Miriam, yes, is listed there. That's correct. Where was I here? So the verse says in Devarim 32:47, it says, this is not something that is empty for you. Okay, meaning this is the whole Torah is not an empty thing. And the Chafetz Chaim says, were it worthless, it's coming from you that it was worthless. And that would result in, as a result of a great many sins, what Yeshayah the prophet himself, Isaiah the prophet himself says, which is that, and he says this in chapter 29:13 of his book, which is that because of the fact that they approached with their mouths and their lips very heavy and their hearts far from me. Okay, so their mouths and lips were heavy and their heart was far, so meaning that they were not taking the words of Torah seriously. And therefore we have to say a remembrance through our speech. And we can't recall it with just doing some type of activity. Because if a person were to fulfill this activity through some type of action, in the way in which God says something, it would be even easier to save yourself from this sin. So now let's try to understand in a similar fashion what the intent of this verse is. And from it, we will see how you will be able to affix yourself to these words in the following way. The Torah, the Holy Torah, explains to us the mitzvah of remembering something in 4 ways. The first one is Zachor et asher asa. Okay? Remember what was done. Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing is Lemi asa, right? To whom it was done. So that was Miriam. And then it says, where was it done? So it was on our way. Okay? And when did it happen, this thing? When did it happen? In our exodus from Egypt. So why are all these 4 parts here in the message? Right? And as was pointed out, why are we remembering all these parts? Why is that important? Because we just know you spoke Lashon Hara and you get Shmiras. We get that, right? Cause and effect. All right? And does it matter if this was Miriam or if it was anybody else? Is there a reason why it had to be on the way and not in the house? If it was something that could have happened at a different time and not while they were in the middle of the Exodus? So these little 4 things are important and intrinsic to this remembrance. And there's an important point to be made from understanding why they're all there. That's why it says at the beginning of it, remember what was done. Okay, that you have to recall and take to heart the severity of this punishment that was done to Miriam because of what she said against her brother Moshe Rabbeinu, who should Allah Shalom, and the punishment of Shmiras, of the skin afflictions, as a result of being a very severe punishment. And it's impossible to get better from it if you don't follow the customs that were set by Hashem himself, the Holy One, blessed be He, in a way that is above the normal patterns of heaven and earth, and that will heal you. And it says in the Midrash itself, this is quoted in Midrash Rabbah Vayikra 16, and it's quoting the verse in Vayikra 14:5. And you shall command, the Kohen should give the command, and you shall slaughter the bird. Okay, so why does he slaughter one and leave one? Because you're supposed to bring two birds. That's me adding that on the outside. So that's to tell you that just like it's impossible to return from having been shechted, right? Once the shechita is done, the slaughtering is done, that's it. That's pretty final. We can't take that back. So too, it's impossible for these afflictions, these skin afflictions, to come back either. And also, the ritual impurity is also very strict, because you have to sit outside of the three camps of the Mishkan, right? And you can't even be amongst the Jewish people there. And other people who were Tameh don't have to do that. You can still, like, even if you have lower levels of Toma, you can still even, be in the city with everybody else. But you can't do that when you have Tzaras. And also, if you're sitting in a room, anyone who enters that room will also become Tameh. Okay, and that's also what it says in the verses. Okay, so and the point is that when you come into contact with someone who speaks Lashon Hara, you become impure just like them. And that means you're almost like a dead person, because the rabbis themselves say in the Gemara in the Darim 64b, where it says, "Recall what was done." So whom was it done? To Miriam, right? Because she was very righteous. And we know that because of the fact that the well belonged to her as a result of her merits. The well that followed the Jewish people. She was also a prophet of God. Because we say in Shemos 15:20 that Miriam was a prophetess. The word is used with her. And she spoke against her brother. That's it. And she loved him so much, and that still made her. And she also took a chance to put him into the water and send him afloat in it in order to save him. That was very dangerous to be done for her. Okay, and never said anything that was bad about her. Okay, instead, when she equates him to every other prophet, okay, and the Rambam himself mentions this is was the problem that she brought up. He says this at the end of the laws of Tzaras. She was saying, "Hey, you should be embarrassed, and not just before many people, but only amongst the three of us here, okay, because we're only in private. And you should be embarrassed about your behavior before the Holy One." Okay? And Moshe himself wasn't so mad about it. Okay? Because we see from the Pasuk, it says in Bamidbar 12:3 that Moshe himself was very humble. So even though it didn't really bother him so much, and even still, all of her great and many deeds could not save her from the punishment of Tzaras that came upon her through this thing. So that's the first thing. That's the first thing that's important to understand. The second thing is the place where it happened, which was on the way. Okay? Because they did not take into account all of her merits in order to outweigh this punishment. And so it happened on the way, and then they came to camp, and it was only when they finally camped that they noticed, oh, Miriam is sitting way outside. Okay? But if they were in camp, it wouldn't be as noticeable, because she would have snuck out quietly, but they were all coming to camp. And because of that, they waited for her. So they had to see her suffer through the Tzaras. And that's how it became obvious to everyone, and she had to experience the embarrassment of it before everybody. Okay, because it says how embarrassing it was in verse 14 there. And also, what's important to note, this is why it's important to note the time when it happened, during the Exodus period, because the time when it happened was at the beginning of the second year of the Exodus, and they haven't yet heard about the really intense punishments that they would eventually suffer. Okay, so we see that Moshe Rabbeinu experienced Shmiras temporarily back in Shemos 4:7. He puts his hand in his chest, takes it out, and it's white like snow, and he puts it back in, and it comes back, to normal flesh. Okay, so if it were to happen as they were going into the land of Israel, then people would have thought it ties to the Meraglim, the spies that went in, and that's why this was so intense. But no, that's why it was done here, while it was done in Parsha. That's what the Parsha was explained over here separately while they were leaving Egypt, so it was not attached up there. Rashi is the one who actually brings this explanation, says the Chafetz Chaim. So from all of this, a person should be able to understand with a very simple, logical jump that the day that we are coming away from the place where Miriam used to stand. Right? We are so far removed from that time period. And we all know about what happened to her as a result of this. And also what happened to the spies as well. How could we not even be that much more careful ourselves about Lashon Hara when we've seen what happens to people? If it were not for the fact that we saw this terrible event happen to Miriam herself. And especially because we know she intended to say these things in order to humiliate someone that was close to her, and to humiliate them. And a person would not be left freed from a punishment for this tremendous deed until they had Shmiras, until they had the affliction or some other affliction. Okay, and which we mentioned earlier in chapter 5. And it would not be stored for you later, for some later time. It comes out now, and so therefore, hearing it and recalling it regularly will save you from this terrible sin. And therefore, what you'll understand from all of this is that every single Jewish person should start to learn all the laws of Lashon Hara in order they should be very, very careful. And they would then see how important it is to have a proper reminder of this event, especially when it comes to Miriam, and especially if their own person is compelling them to want to say these things. Because the speech itself alone doesn't take you to do Lashon Hara. It's the satisfaction of what you say to the other person. And especially when you say to a person like this, which was never commanded by the Torah, and you would be tripped up by the prohibition of Lashon Hara. And on that thought, he ends the chapter. Next time, we will talk about the ways in which people can encounter Lashon Hara and how to be careful from them. So we'll see that that's continuing our discussion. Thank you very much for joining, and we will see you next time. And have a happy Purim.